Yeah, he's doing that. All right, so we're streaming.
Sorry. Here we are. The room.
Oh. Do you want to preserve you? Or bring up a note?
No, I don't have any notes.
It works out a little bit better anyway, because at least you'll know what's coming up.
So now it's you can see it streaming on YouTube because I'm going to be watching for comments.
Well, it's not going to do presenter view for you for some
Well,
reason. You're unlucky, but just use zero key. Yep. Advance. And then remember on this, talk into the mic, or they won't hear you online. Okay.
And then any questions that are asked, whether I ask them from online or people in the past, you can repeat them. So
Check the audio on that, will you?
I might forget that.
You might.
It's a little bit behind.
Yep. So we're good.
You go check mine too.
Okay. Yep. I'm heading your way.
Can you plug a clicker?
Check the audio. Yes, you can. If there's an extra spot, you should be able to plug a clicker in if you have it. Okay. Yep.
Is mine set up? Entrada, maybe?
Drive for a second. It's just little.
DeMille and
Yeah.
DeMille.
Either way. Oh, that's not funny, that's like. Pictures from Southern Utah, fountains like mountains, but I put more M's in it than there is, so. Right. Yeah, we're lucky I know what it looks like, the letter looks like.
You know how to use it in the word, just not how to sound in the word.
Yep. We'll give it a few more minutes and we did say no already. Right?
I guess it's probably they can't use the whiteboard or anything, so they won't get it.
It'll be hard for these guys on the, I mean, they'll be able to see you writing something, but they won't be able to see what you write. I mean,
Find some slides for my deal tomorrow, I don't actually use more of the whiteboard.
I mean, you probably, and I don't know, it's probably gonna be your preference if that's gonna help you the best, as long as you're able to explain it, so these guys know what you're writing. Yeah, and hold this leg in the air and do a couple jumps.
It'll probably be like that trying. Hey,
Hey, yeah,
is that one job description here?
I'm whatever you want me to be.
Okay.
I'm here to help.
Okay. Pretty good.
That's right.
Uh-huh.
It says sucker right on it.
Yes,
Saw that.
yes, it does, right there. SUCKER.
And you can get on a roll, so like 5 minutes after finish, you start filming these streamers. We could be here for like 3 days.
We'll keep him to the program. But, what is about an hour, so 1:30 to 2:30.
You're asking us?
Hey. It doesn't say anything on there. I was I'm the equipment guy. Looks aren't always what they seem. Yeah, probably not. Okay. All right, so we'll go ahead and get started here. I'd like to welcome Willam DeMille. He will explain how he's created a functioning soil in his vegetable production systems by focusing on the 5 spheres found within the soil. He will define what a functioning soil is and how he managed to keep it working, along with some mistakes he's made in the past that has destroyed the soil. He'll give practical examples and real-life experiences that have worked for him. And so if everyone would give him a round of applause and welcome William up here, we'll get started.
Okay, I'm super happy to be here today. Vegetables is my thing. I've been doing vegetables all my life. I was a little tiny baby in the garden with my dad. We raised most of our food, and I've never got out of the vegetable garden. I was a tillage person. We used to have big tractors and bed makers and all these things, but now I am becoming reformed because I've learned what's going on in the soil. Just for context about this today, I come from a school. We run a school. Me and Jared Sorensen, he's right here. We run a school on the ranch. I live on the ranch in Clover Valley, Nevada, and we bring people in to teach them these kinds of principles. So this presentation is within context of what we do with a lot of our students and the things that we teach them. So soil health is no longer a question of whether or not it works. So anybody hearing this speech, you want to know that I'm coming from a perspective that it absolutely works. There's no questions asked. If you still have questions about that, we can talk afterwards, but this speech is not to get anybody up to speed that it actually works, because it simply works great for me. So let's start out by defining a functioning soil. What is a functioning soil? So I'm going to go through this functioning soil side. You guys can go ahead and just look at the non-functioning side. A functioning soil, it holds water and nutrients just like a sponge, and it simply won't do that if it's not functioning. Roots penetrate the soil without obstructions. They'll go deep, deep into the ground. We don't even know how deep certain species will go. Functioning soils are full of beneficial microbes. It stays in place when the wind blows and there's floods. It holds high levels of carbon. It feeds plants because it is functioning. That's what a soil is supposed to do, is to feed plants. But how many of us go out into the world and we're trying to farm and the soil is not doing anything and our plants won't grow? Well, that's an obvious thing, that our soils are not functioning, okay? Soils keep plants healthy. You should have low disease and pest pressure in a functioning soil. Plants will grow to their genetic capacity, and you should be able to hear the environment. When you're standing out there in your garden or your fields, anywhere in agriculture, you should hear birds, you should hear bees, you should hear insects. It should be alive. You need to be hearing it. If you're not hearing it, it's an indicator that your soil does not function. I got this picture from my friend Josh Adams. This is an alfalfa leaf. How many of you have ever seen an alfalfa leaf? This leaf is too big to be alfalfa. This is where people start throwing tomatoes at me and saying you are a liar because alfalfa leaves don't get that big. In functioning soils, plants will begin to express their genetic capacity, and they will become a lot bigger and more beautiful, more wonderful, and they will start doing things, and we can't even recognize them. We go out there to recognize plants, and sometimes we will see species that do things that we can't hardly even explain it. Why is that so beautiful and big? This alfalfa, something's genetically wrong with it. No, we've just never seen alfalfa before that was actually growing in a really good soil. This is what it can do normally, okay? So let's realize what happens in the world that stops the soil from functioning. Natural catastrophes stop. So this is just a natural thing that happened. Things like forest fires, floods, tornadoes, whatever. There's all these catastrophes that can happen. What about wild herds that have no predators? In Nevada right now there's a problem with wild horses. There's no natural predator, and so mule deer don't have a winter range. They're up in the mountains. They come down. They're suffering to live because there's nothing to eat because the wild horses are eating it all. And then the soils are not producing as much over the decades because of these kinds of problems that happen. In agriculture, it all goes back to management. Management is the big problem. to stop the soils from functioning, taking them from functioning to non-functioning. Most of us in agriculture, it's been going on for so many generations, like 100 years of lots of tillage, that we come into these systems and they simply are not functioning when we inherit that piece of land. So things like burning, too much irrigation, too much tillage, overgrazing, too much haying, undergrazing, is that ever a problem? Most people don't undergraze, but think about the bison on the Great Plains. There are species of grass on the Great Plains that are going extinct because they're not being grazed. So that's an interesting thought. So how do I know, when I walk out in my vegetable garden, how do I know if my soil functions? And these are just the simplest things. If I have a piece of land, just, and I think it's doing good, well, don't fertilize it this year and just take one strip right across the field and put your fertilizer on. If I see a plant growth response to where I put the fertilizer, then I know the soil isn't functioning and the plants there needed that fertilizer stimulant to grow. We should see absolutely no difference where we put the fertilizer. It should be the same growth in a functioning soil, which makes the implications really awesome because anhydrous ammonia, that's a normal fertilizer for corn. It went from $500 a ton, I think it was last year, maybe the year before, but this year it's $1,500 a ton. That's going to put some farmers out of business. So we have challenges in this world. Some of the common myths that I hear all the time in the teaching that we do is I hear soils are deficient in plant nutrients, and I disagree with that. Microbes aren't worth worrying about. We don't even know what they are. It's a myth. Tillage is a good tool. It can be, but it's way overused. Crop rotation is good. Crop rotation is a thing of the past. I need to adjust soil pH. No, you don't. Weeds are bad. Weeds are wonderful. Okay? So anyway, the opposite is what's on that other side over there. But let's just go to pH real quick. As a plant grows, it can grow in any soil, any pH. Your soil test could come back saying, oh, you need to adjust pH and do this and that. But if you put the right microbes on that seed coat when it grows, when it starts to grow, and then the microbes are in place, the root, that plant through the root will feed those microbes the exudates that it needs to uptake the nutrients that it has to have in the plant. So you could say you have 6 inches along that plant, and it'll be putting different exudates out at different root hairs along that plant. And it will select for the particular microbes that do the solubilizing. And so if it needs boron, a certain spot on that root will be solubilizing for that specific nutrient. And so those microbes will grow that solubilize boron, and then the plant can take it up. It's not a matter of us adjusting soil pH, it's a matter of having the right microbes in the soil at the right time. And we need a large diversity of those microbes. So what are the true deficiencies in our soils? And there's 3 huge deficiencies that I see. And a lot of this goes beyond the soils, and it's about us as people. But microbes, they are so deficient in our soils. A lot of times we'll do a soil test and we'll say, oh yeah, boy, we have 20,000 species of microbes. That's nothing. You should have hundreds of thousands of species of microbes in a healthy soil. People, we are deficient in the proper knowledge, so we simply don't know how to grow crops because we've been doing it the way we've been taught in the past, the way our parents taught us, the way it's always been done, the way we learned in college from our horticultural professors. Which takes us to the next one. We are hugely deficient in forgiveness. How many tens of thousands of dollars have we spent on our agricultural degrees? Here's a scenario that I see all the time. First of all, the child did not want to go to college, but the only way they were going to inherit the farm is dad says, you go get your degree if you want this farm. So they went to college reluctantly, and they came home with the degree with resentments about it because they lost 4 or 6 or 12 years in college. And then now, at this point, with what we're learning about soil health, and the sciences are advancing so fast in the last decade that we can't even keep track of it. But now we're realizing that it was all false. Dr. Christine Jones from Australia, she was brilliant and said, I spent my whole life in the university teaching people everything that was wrong, so I have to dedicate the rest of my life to teaching them the right thing, which is pretty awesome, actually. But we're learning so much that we need to just keep moving on, you know. But the best way to adjust our mindset to these new things, just forgive the past. Forgive it. Forget those resentments if we have those. I have those, and so I know that other people do too. So there's 5 spheres within the soil. There's the Detritus sphere, the Rhizosphere, the Porosphere, the Rhizosphere, and the Drillosphere. So these, when you dig up a piece of soil with your shovel, Jimmy was talking about using the shovel. I do that all the time. I love that. Because when you dig it up the soil, you can look at it and you can see. So I have a picture here of the soil, and this is in the ranch, in a hayfield there in Clover Valley, Nevada. And the detritus sphere, that is the dead organic matter that's on the top. So see all this grass that's turning yellow? This is the fall time of the year, so things were starting to turn yellow. The dead grass around here, that is your detritus. It's the dead, dying organic matter. If cattle are out there grazing and they leave cow pies out there on the ground, that's detritus. Now, detritus is food for the microbes, and you have to have a lot of that on the soil all the time. And if you have enough detritus, that feeds the microbes, and the microbes create the aggregates. Now, it's going to be the little tiny guys, the bacteria, they produce the microaggregates, and then the fungus come along and they wrap it all together, and that creates the macroaggregates. And that's what we can see with our eyes. That's why it's called macros. You don't need a microscope because you can grab soil and there's all these little tiny chunks. And so those are your macroaggregates. And between those macroaggregates, now there is space, and we call that the porosphere. And that's where the water can go down in. The roots can get down in there. All the little bugs can get down in that soil. And I'm not talking 2 or 3 inches. We should be building soils that are going feet, 10, 20 feet. Okay, no, that takes time, but through our management, we can make that happen. And then there's the rhizosphere. Now, the rhizosphere is the second food source, and it could be the most important food source. There's not enough science being done to know yet. In 20 years, we can answer this question better. But the rhizosphere, those roots going down are putting out that liquid sunlight, that those exudates from photosynthesis are going into the soil. They are feeding the microbes, all right? So there's the detritus sphere, that's the number 1. It feeds microbes. And then number 4, the rhizosphere, those roots are feeding the microbes. We've got to feed the microbes. So I'm going to ask a question, but don't answer. Oh, you can if you want, but what is your most important livestock? If you're a sheep person, you're going to say sheep. If you're a cattleman, you're going to say cattle. If you're into hogs, you're going to say the swine. Whatever our thing is, that's the most important livestock. I've been teaching classes for 15 plus years on gardening, and I have always taught our microbes are our most important livestock. Absolutely, no questions asked. And of course, the drillosphere is your earthworms. And they're the big, giant guys. You got to think of like a continent, like North America. We have I-40, I-80, I-90, I-70. There's all these freeways going back and forth, and the semi-trucks are taking stuff. And then we have train tracks going, and that's how we move things. That's what the drillosphere does. These earthworms are going back and forth, and they're moving microbes all over the place. And they're moving carbon all over the place. They're taking the detritus from the top, and they're taking it way down into the soil. So we have to have all of these things together. We can't say, earthworms are my favorite, because they will die without everything else. We have to have the complete system in place. So what do we actually do to create the functioning soil in a vegetable system? Now, it's the same. I don't care if you're growing grass for cattle or vegetables or corn, it doesn't matter. It's all the same. These are principles. But we have to have the beneficial microbes, okay? You have to have the microbes. And how do you get microbes? Remember, they're our most important livestock. So we have to make sure they have oxygen, they need the right temperature, they need water to drink, food to eat, and we need to have a nice home for them to live in. And number 1, and I've started doing consulting on this, is You need a management plan. You need an adaptive soil management plan so that you know what to do so that when you get tempted to get out the tiller, you don't. Now maybe you need the tiller and it may be in context with something you're doing. Let's move on here. This is one of our students. This is my most important student because that's my daughter. But this is one of our students in the classes that we teach. Look at the smile on this kid's face. This was the day she first saw a microarthropod. How many of you have seen a microarthropod? Raise your hands. They're micro, so you obviously need, no hands went up. We don't see them very often, do we? But I have a bunch of kids who are learning to do this, and not just kids. It's hard for adults to come to our school, but I'll teach any ages. I've had senior citizens come. But we're teaching people what they need in their soils so that they can have a very healthy, beautiful soil, which translates to a healthy, beautiful life. But these are the things that we're teaching them. We're teaching them how to find cellulose. How many of you have seen a cellulose on the micro level? Well, it's pretty cool. You know, you get a nice compost going, and you're looking at it under a microscope. There are these little curly Q things. You're like, whoa, what is that? Let's talk specific vegetable gardens. So we're going a little bit more on how-to after some of these principles that we've talked about. These are 10 things that I live by. I never till the soil. I plant new crops a few weeks before the last crops are harvested. Okay? It's that living root always in the soil. And I have pictures to show you how to do this. I add earthworms. If I don't have 20 earthworms in every cubic foot of soil, you just dig it up and take it apart and start counting them. If you don't have them, I add them in. Test soil for soil microbes, not plant nutrients. Our common soil tests that are done nowadays, they were invented in the 1940s and 50s. Why are we still using that technology? You know, we need to be doing it different so it works differently. Don't ever pile up your manure. It will grow bad stuff. So those of you who have livestock and using manure in vegetable systems, never pile it up. It's going to go anaerobic. It's going to grow human pathogens, plant pathogens, all kinds of bad things. Just compost it. Figure out a composting system. And that's how you grow the good microbes to get back into your land, your vegetable growing system. Rotate roots, not crops. Earlier I said crop rotation is a thing of the past. It is, but soil health is not. So I do rotate roots. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more. But I separate all plants into two groups. And this is just my thing. But I have my tap roots. So what is a tap root that's a vegetable? A carrot, a parsnip, a daikon. Okay, and there's a bunch of others. But we, like screwzanera and salsify, we could go on about those weird vegetables. But they are tap roots, and they'll go way down in. A lot of them will break up hard pans. And so what are fibrous roots? Pretty much everything else of what I just said, but I really love the grains. I love the grasses. So I have those in my vegetable rotation system. I plant with a pointed stick. In the gardening world, we call that a dibble. I have a picture of that so you can see what it is. But you could use like a paper pot transplanter. They build those, you know, it's like a $3,000 thing, but it's handheld. A person could easily farm a 5-acre vegetable farm with that type of an implement. But any no-till method will work for vegetables. And don't let anybody tell you that's not true because I've been doing it and I'm proving that it works. Minimize your monocrops. What I do is I will plant my crops in the row will be a monocrop, but then between the rows in the furrow, I'll plant a bunch of other stuff. So my garden can be ugly. It looks like it's a weed patch. People drive by and say, I thought he was an expert gardener. Had people laughing at me last year. It was great. So, but save and breed your own seeds. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. And if you have a big field, if you're over like 2 acres on a vegetable scale, do the cover crop thing like we've been talking in with all these other things besides vegetables. Just grow the cover crops, roll them down with a roller crimper instead of adding the compost to the soil, to the soil surface. One quick word about nitrogen, and then we're going to get into some pictures to show you how I do this. So if you look at this slide on the left side up there at the top, most leachable forms of nitrogen. Now, these are things you buy in a bag. This is commercial fertilizer, nitrate, nitrite, ammonium, okay? These are things you buy in a bag. These things will wash away with water. If water washes, this stuff goes away. Look at the other list: bacteria, fungi, protozoa, nematodes, microarthropods, roots, other organic matter. These are living systems, but they are the same thing chemically. When they poop and when they die, this is what they are. And notice that bacteria is the only one that is nitrate. Everything else is ammonium. And so if all you have in your system is bacteria, which probably 100% of tillage systems are only bacteria. And now look at the bottom of the page where it says weed food, that's nitrate. So if we're tilling, we are selecting for weeds every single time we till. But if we're not tilling and we start growing the groups of fungus, protozoa, nematodes, all these other guys, we are selecting for a lot of ammonia, so we start to get a balance of the nitrate to ammonia, and with a lot of ammonia in the soil, the weed seeds that are there, they simply don't sprout. Okay? But what about harvesting? You gotta be kidding me. You're not gonna till and you're gonna grow potatoes and carrots? Come on. Okay, we harvested 1/4 of an acre of potatoes this last year, and I pulled every one of them by hand. I just went out right before the leaves were turning yellow, but the potatoes were huge. I went out and I just grabbed the plants and we just pulled them up because our soil was functioning. It is a functioning system. There was no compaction. There were no hard soils out there. When I go out with my shovel and stick it in the ground, I can get it almost all the way in. It feels almost like sand. You can get it in there and then you just push on it with your foot a little bit to get it the rest of the way in. Soils should be springy and spongy. Okay, so you should be able to just pull these root crops out. Now, obviously, if you have a pivot and you're raising potatoes, it's going to be a little bit different method. But the principles are the same. Here's how I fix my soil problems. Please look at the right side of the screen. The answer is the same for every problem with a couple of tiny things. But this is what I have done everywhere I have farmed, and I've farmed in a lot of weird places. But I hear all the time, my soil's too sandy. What do? I can't grow anything. Everybody's complaining about these things. My soil has too much clay. My soil's too compacted. My soil has too many weeds. Okay. Forget tillage. Go out there with 3 inches of good compost, put it on top of the soil, and plant your transplants in it, and grow your vegetables, and stop worrying about what you can't do. Because the microbes in that compost are going to penetrate down in there, and they're going to fix the sand, the clay, the compaction, pH problems. It's all going to be great, all right? And then you ask a very legitimate question. What about quackgrass and morning glory? Because that will wipe us out. Yes, they will. So get 2 or 3 or 5 layers of cardboard. Go find a refrigerator store that has huge sheets of cardboard and put that on the ground. Probably 2 to 3 layers is sufficient. I'm joking when I say 8 layers, but it's hard to kill some of these invasive weeds. But you put those on super thick, and then you put on 4 or 5 layers of your compost, put your transplants in, and that will normally eradicate these horrible weeds, okay? If they do come up through it, you could put a silage tarp on that piece of land for 12 months, and it will eradicate those plants, and then you can get started on this system. But bugs and disease, how is 3 inches of compost on there going to help bugs and disease? Come on, you've got to be nuts. What happens is by getting the right microbes in the soil, the plants are so incredibly healthy that the bugs and disease don't cause a huge epidemic. So the ecological role of this, we need to understand what pests are in ecology. The way Mother Nature sees pests is they are the cleanup crew of dead materials, things that need to be composed. They'll come in and they'll start doing that. Pests and disease, it's the same thing, If something's out of balance in nature, they're there to clean that mess up. So what is a 5,000 acre field of soybeans? That is an ecological disaster. Mother Nature does not know what to do with a monocrop like that. And so do people have pest problems? Yes, they do. But by understanding that it's the way ecology sees it, it helps us to know what to do better in in our vegetable growing systems. So by mixing up all the crops together and having the diversity, then it works out a lot better, because then the pests just tend to not attack it that way. What are weeds ecologically? You know, weeds are a lot of things. They're an indicator. If I walk out into a field and I see a certain group of plants growing, I can know which ecological succession that is in. Is it early succession or late succession? What's happening in the soil? So, you know, they're a great indicator to tell us that. But they are the first thing to come after a catastrophe like a forest fire. The weeds that start growing, they're there to put biomass on the ground. They want to cover the ground. Nature's always trying to cover the ground. The only time it doesn't is if it's gone too far and now it's desertifying and it's going the opposite way. And so the only way to bring that ecologically healthy is to have a herd of cattle, because we need the cow is the most wonderful creature in the world to stop desertification. But that's a whole nother talk. Taproots. Taproots are deep channels, the highways for the microbes to get all that good stuff way down in the soil. So we've got to have those. And the fibrous roots, ecologically speaking, are to get carbon in the soil. Carbon is free fertilizer. The air is full of it. Politicians scream about it. Let's use that free resource, get it in the soil by growing plants all the time. Then we don't have to buy the fertilizers. People are talking about 5 principles of soil health for a long time. Recently, the leaders in the community have added a 6th one, which is context. I'm a rebel, so I had to add another one. It's called mindfulness. My wife's a psychologist. She talks about mindfulness and how important that is. But mindfulness is being present in the moment. We have to adapt what we do every single day on our farm. It is not a formula. We have got to be mindful. We need to focus on the commitment. You know, I made a commitment to do this. Am I going to actually follow through and do it? Am I going to have the persistence, the mental fortitude to go forward when I hit a brick wall and I don't know what to do because I've hit a problem? You need to focus with laser focus. So we need to have that mindfulness in there. Let's jump down to diversity real quick. Monocrop the rows, polycrop the furrows. And your garden will look like a mess until you've done it for 2 or 3 years and you see your production skyrocketing and you don't have hardly any inputs of fertilizer and all these sprays and stuff. So that's pretty awesome. Animal impact. How do we have an animal impact in the vegetable system? Because that's been a hard one for people to understand, this whole regenerative agriculture movement. But for me, it's the bugs. It's the microbes. It's the earthworms. They are absolutely an animal impact. Don't think you have to bring your 300 head of cattle into your 12 square foot greenhouse once a year, or you're not doing regenerative ag. Context matters, okay? And your animal impact is that healthy soil food web. So these pictures, you got to watch the screen because I'm going fast right here. I'm going to show you something that happened to me, pretty amazing, in the last 2 years of my life. My friend Jared Sorensen, we've known each other for 17 years or something like that. He called me in May of 2020. Luckily, COVID made me lose my job. And so I was sitting there thinking, wow, okay, the world is changing. He calls me on the phone and said, remember those greenhouses we talked about years ago? I want to build one. This is the first day I saw that piece of property in Clover Valley, Nevada. That's me and my daughter. This is 2 months later. This is the day we broke ground. And that's Jared on the bulldozer showing me how to run it, which could have been a mistake because I got a little out of hand. So I scraped off all the topsoil. We made a big pile of it. And then we started bringing in boulders. So this hole was about 7 feet deep on the deep end. And we stacked these boulders up until they were 10 feet tall. So this wall is 130 feet long, 10 feet tall. And it was too cheap to rent or buy a transit, so I got the rifle or a scope off my rifle and I duct taped it to a tripod and put a little tiny level on there. And I shot level lines. And so we got the frame built and we put it in there. And Heavenly Father thought it was a really good idea because look at the rainbow he sent us. So this was pretty awesome. And then there I am with a tiller. Can you believe that I used a tiller after all this mess I'm talking about? Now think about context for just a moment here. We have been driving a bulldozer back and forth on this. We moved all the topsoil out. I brought in a foot of topsoil back in at this point, but it was only a foot. We brought in some bucketfuls of compost and put on there with it. But this has been driven back and forth for 30 or 40, 50 times with the bulldozer, 400 or 500 times, maybe more, with the backhoe to bring in all those boulders. Does this soil have a compaction problem at this point? I'll let you answer your own question about that. But we tilled that so that I could actually start a farm on the worst soil that we could possibly have created for a vegetable garden. And to make sure that I didn't ever take the tiller in there again, we finished the stone wall, and I built that door. It's still my favorite part of the greenhouse, but, you know, it doesn't grow plants, so I shouldn't be that excited about it. But it's a cool door, and we even made it beautiful with lights, so it was pretty neat, you know. And there's a picture of my daughter again. And then here I am inside. This is right before we got the plastic on, and you can see the rows behind me. We got it all leveled out, so it's ready to plant into. And then the day came, and we covered it with plastic. And we're getting the plastic all attached, so that's all good and happy. And then right here, I want to point out the vent system. On the top of the stone wall, that 10-foot tall wall, there is the vent that's 6 feet wide and 100 and whatever long, like 134 feet, I think. And then on the other side, the vent's closed right now, but you can see the 3-foot sidewall on the opposite side there, and so that rolls up too. And in the summer, it worked so perfectly. It was only about 5 to 8 degrees warmer in that greenhouse than it was outside. So it was the perfect design. And because it would get hot in there and heat rises, and it went right up that stone wall and out, and then it was able to just suck in from the other side. So you could feel the air coming out on a day when there was absolutely no wind at all outside. And here's the vent on the outside. You can see that a little bit better from that perspective. And the tool rack, we built that tool rack because if you're paying employees, there's nothing worse than them spending time looking for something you can't find. So we just kept that organized, but I thought it was pretty too. And then there we got the stone floor installed. And here's our classroom for our kids to come and learn how to do soil health and regenerative agriculture and learn all about the Georgic tradition. So it's pretty awesome. But look in the background. See how I have the silage tarp on top of the soil? I turned on a sprinkler for 3 or 4 days in there, and I just saturated it really wet, and then I covered it with the silage tarp, and it stayed covered for a long time. All the weed seeds that were in there grew, because since we've tilled it and disturbed this, there's obviously going to be weed seeds that grow, because that's what happens. Well, they grew under the silage tarp, and I would lift it up and look under there and think, yeah, we're killing all these weeds without doing anything. But there were big, long, like little tiny germinated seeds would get 3 and 4 inches long trying to stretch for light. And so once we moved it off and planted the garden, we had very few weeds germinate. So it was a pretty good tool that we did. This stone part here, we have chairs set up in there now, and we have fun times with the family in there, and students go in there and we learn together. Here's our first harvest, and you can see how I'm moving back to the black tarp to plant new things. This was January 4th, and we had a beautiful harvest in there that day, and then we've harvested every week since, so it's been a year and a month or 2. So the stone wall is always a hit. Anytime visitors come, everybody wants to climb on it, so we let them. And we plant lots of herbs in the stone wall, and so that's pretty awesome. The mice stole some pea seeds that I had planted in the bottom, and they put them in the stone wall, and those grew. And so it boggled my mind because they didn't go up like a pea vine or like a pole, like a bean pole, because obviously I wasn't going to do that, but I let those plants grow. And they grew down 4 and 5 feet high, hanging down, bloomed, had beautiful peas, and we ate them. So now we're going to be planting peas in that stone wall. It's pretty great. So back to one of the principles, what I call mindfulness. We need to use what we have, use laser focus on what you're doing. A lot of times I've struggled to get carrots to germinate, so I just always cover them with cardboard. I'll get the ground really wet, we plant the carrots, the cardboard keeps them moist so they can germinate. You can see the vent working here in the middle of last summer. The vents are open on both sides. Notice the vent on the short wall there. I have all those tall plants growing there. And I thought if we had a really hot summer, that might stop some of the airflow coming in and it would get too hot. So we switched that over to a strawberry row, and you can see behind me there, now that entire row is just strawberries. So I have the very low growing plant in there so that it's not obstructing any airflow that comes through. Now, I'm bending over there looking at the cover crop. This is a cover crop mix just like you would use in any other cropping system. This is Daikon Radishes, hairy vetch, and cereal rye. So I've got the taproot in there. Now remember, why am I doing this in a vegetable system? Why would we waste the space? Because I compacted this with a bulldozer. Nobody would do that in their home vegetable garden. So we have to go to extreme lengths to get this not compacted. Here's my penetrometer, that bed where we just saw the cover crop. It's reading about 150 pounds at about 2 inches right now, okay? So that freaks me out as a farmer, and I think I gotta get in there with a tiller. But I made the huge wall so I can't get in with it, so we're lucky. So here's my tillage system. See the Daikon Radish and the cereal rye, which is the grass. And then, that's putting amazing amounts of carbon in the soil. The Daikon Radish is drilling holes all through that, and it is punching through. Because see how that, I was gonna put a tape measure by that, I forgot, but that's like an 8-inch radish. But those things will get really big around. They can get 2 or 3 feet long. They can get giant. But I just pulled that one right now to show you. The third plant there is the hairy vetch, and I've got a close-up of the picture here. Look at the rhizosheath on that hairy vetch. See how so the one on the right there that's on the paper, it's covered with soil. That's what you want to see. Your roots should always be covered with a rhizosheath, because that's what that tells you is that those soil particles are being glued to the root itself by the bacteria that's in the soil. So we know that we have bacteria that is eating their exudates coming out of those roots, and they're adhering to that. And they are solubilizing the minerals that those plants need, so we never need to worry about fertilizer for these guys, because it's working. The other picture there on the left where the roots are white, I just washed this off. I had to wash it in a bucket so that we could see that. But you can see the little nitrogen-fixing nodules on this hairy vetch legume here. And I smashed 3 or 4 of them, and they were clear on the inside. One had a tiny bit of pink in it, but those should be blood red if they are fixing nitrogen. So when you pull up your legumes and you see those nodules, just because they have nodules on them does not mean they are fixing nitrogen. So what I need to do next time is to inoculate these seeds or the soil or whatever with the proper bacteria, the rhizobium, so that they can start growing the nitrogen in the soil. The thing is, it's great to be able to do this and dig these up and look at them, because now I know what's happening. I just figured, yeah, they'll just fix nitrogen. Well, they're not fixing nitrogen, are they? Because they're not red. So they need that inoculant. So this is a picture. I moved this cardboard back. This is the same row where I had that cover crop. Okay, now I have put down cardboard right on top of the cover crop. I didn't cut it out. I didn't mow it. I didn't disc it in. I didn't get in the greenhouse with a 400 horsepower tractor. None of that. No little tiny rototiller. I just went in there. I put the cardboard right on top of it. I got on top of it and walked around. You're not supposed to work on garden beds, right? Well, that's mythology. That's the old way. If you're tilling, don't walk on it. And so the cardboard is there, and then I'm putting 2 or 3 inches of compost on top of that. And you can see this compost has a high level of wood chips in it, but you can use any type of good compost. And then I just plant right in it. Okay, and the only reason you can see the cardboard there is I just peeled it back so you could see what was happening, just to demonstrate this picture. So you can see the cover crop underneath right there where I've moved it back. It's turning yellow, it's dying, and it's just going to decompose back into the soil. Here I am with some pom-pom lettuces that came out of that greenhouse and my 28-pound cabbage. And so it's working, even though I drove the bulldozer and moved how many tons of stones were it to build that wall. Even though I did that, we're still growing good food in there. Here's my daughter with a big, beautiful cauliflower. And here was our boot camp last year. Like I said, we do all of our education stuff. These are people who came to our Feed Your Family boot camp, and we taught them how to do all this stuff. So it was super awesome. Where's Brian? Brian was at boot camp. Of course, Jared was there. He's helping teach it. So here's a picture. Brian's in that picture right there. And there's Jared on the fence, not sitting on it, but standing by it. I'm the guy in the cowboy hat. We built this garden in 30 minutes. And here's what we did. We took a whole bunch of cardboard boxes, okay? We walked out to the lawn. You can see it needs to be mowed, but it's just a lawn. Most people who live in a house have a lawn, right? We walked out to the lawn. We put down the cardboard. We brought in the tractor, and we dumped on some loads of compost. We spread it out. We grabbed the transplants out of the trays, and we transplanted them in there. And in 30 minutes, we walked back to the classroom to try to figure out what else to do. And this is what it looked like. I think it was like 94 days later, actually. But, you know, and I weeded it one time, and it probably didn't really need it. But there it is. The grass, the clovers, the dandelions, the other things that are growing in the lawn, they will not penetrate and come up through that cardboard. You know, you have to overlap your cardboard. You don't want spaces in between, or those things will come up. If I had quackgrass or morning glory, I would be putting on 2 or 3 layers of cardboard before you do this, okay? But I didn't have those, so we just did 1 layer, pretty much. But we got a lot of food out of this garden. Compost is my favorite thing in the world. It is my #1 tool on my farm because I can grow all the microbes we need in compost to be able to inoculate our systems. So a big, like a 4 or 5 foot round thing of compost that's 4 feet high, we can make enough extract out of that to inoculate 400 acres. Okay, it doesn't take a lot of compost to get the microbes into the soils. It just has to be good compost. If you're getting compost from a municipality, it's not compost, it's something else. It's reduced waste, it's a mess. It's gonna be filled with bad things that are gonna kill your plants. So you need to learn how to make it yourself. I teach classes if you want to know. Here's my worm bin. I really love worms. Worms are the coolest thing. So this plywood thing in here by the steps, that's my worm bin, and I love growing worms. We harvested a bunch of worm castings this year, and I've been, in my little seedlings that I'm growing, I've been using pure worm castings as the potting soil, and those little tiny plants are looking like that alfalfa leaf I showed you earlier. I can't even identify these cotyledons that I've seen all my life because they are expressing their genetics that I've never seen before, so it's pretty exciting. We just should have been on a commercial for that one. Here's my worms. Look, we could look at this for the rest of the time. How much time we got? And just look at those beauties. So I have red worms and European night crawlers, and I use them both, and I just mix them all up. But they're pretty awesome. Okay, so living roots in the soil. So what do we see here? Obviously, we see a green bean plant with green beans that are ready to harvest. This plant has not been picked yet. That's my first picking. And you can look closely and still see little white flowers on those plants. So they're just starting to produce. They're going to produce for, 4 to 6 weeks, whatever. But I have already planted the next crop. Look out there in front of that plant there, and you can see the cotyledons of the Daikon radishes coming up. Okay, they are already coming up. When I picked the last beans off of here, when the flowers you see on there were the size of those beans, and I went ahead and picked them, the Daikon radishes were the same height as those beans. Of course, these are bush beans, so they only got, 16 inches high. But that's okay. We can grow different kinds of plants at the same time. It is mythology to believe that plants will steal nutrients from each other. Okay, that can happen, but it doesn't happen if you're managing it right. All right? Okay, so the kale there on the right side, that kale is 14 months old. I took this picture like 4 days ago. But look underneath it. It's hard to see there, but focus underneath on the compost. You can see tiny little plants in there. I only do crop rotation if I have to. It makes sense for me to grow kale here, so I replanted with kale in that very same place. And so it is already growing. These will probably come out in 2 or 3 months from now, the big ones. I'll just cut them off with a pair of pruners. I'm not going to pull them up. That's destroying my fungal networks in the ground. So I'll just cut them off at ground level. And by that time, the ones underneath are going to be 4 to 6 inches high. Perfect size to start harvesting baby kale. The other picture is just a mixed row of garlic, beets, and different kinds of lettuce. Okay, so I like to transplant everything, but how in the world do we transplant carrots? That's a tough one. It's a rough one. I've been trying to fight with that for years. But if you can get carrots growing and they're about 4 to 6, maybe even 8 weeks old in a little pot, and then you could transplant those, that is 4 or 6 or 8 weeks that you're growing something else in that same square footage. And then if you can time this out right, you could bring those plants out and then put those carrots right in there. But that's nuts. Nobody can transplant and grow carrots. Jared, how many carrots have you been eating lately? And most of them were transplanted. Okay? So that's pretty awesome. So let me interpret this picture. Can you see the little paper cups? They're like that big around. And you can see the little plants inside them. Between them are lettuce. So I had this piece of soil here. We took all the plants out. I took a drill with an auger on it, just a cordless drill. I drilled holes and I spaced them out so that each little pot of carrots, and I put between 5 and 8 seeds in each pot, because then they're thin enough that they'll grow into a bunch of carrots, and when they won't be weird, you know. And then I put those in there, and then between them I will interplant it with something else that grows fast. So this lettuce will grow, and then we will harvest it about the same time that those carrots need more room to grow. Okay? So I do this kind of thing all the time, and it has worked out very, very well. Strawberries, this was November when I took this picture, and you can see that hole there in front of my finger. Well, that's because I had planted garlic, and so now the garlic is coming up between the strawberries, and these have been doing very good. And here's my system of how I actually do it on a small scale. So if you're gardening under 2 acres, you could do it with this system. If you're 2 acres or more, you probably need a little bit different equipment, or people, whatever. But on the right side there, you can see the shovel handle that I've pointed. That's my dibble. So I'll use a 200 plug cell tray, and I'll fill it with seeds. And then when they're ready to transplant, I just poke the holes in the top of my beds where I've put all my compost, and then I just stick these plants in. And remember, I'm usually doing that 2 or 3 weeks before the other crop comes out. And those roots will get established, and then when the other crop comes out, then they're already going. They're already 2 weeks, we're ahead, right? The drill system, in the middle of that tray there, where the drill is, you can see that can. It's just a soup can, just a regular tin can. And then I will take paper, and just normal paper works, just regular typing paper works. And you just roll it up, and I make a paper pot. We fill that with worm castings and put whatever in it. I mean, this works for all vegetables. If it's a cucurbit, that's like a melon or a pumpkin, we put those in, we just put the seeds in. But if there are other crops, we will put in, we can transplant into them, like tomatoes, peppers, and stuff. We will grow the seeds in the 200 cell, and we will transplant. So we'll transplant up once into the paper pot, and then when I go outside, it's just a matter of one person drilling holes, and you just space it whatever your spacing is, 1 foot, 2 feet, whatever. For big old pumpkins, like 4 feet apart up your row. And this is a row that maybe was rolled down with a roller crimper or something that was cereal rye. You roll that down, you wait a couple of days until it's kind of, you're sure it's dead, so you don't have to do it again. And then we drill the holes, we pop those in the ground, and yeah, man, there we go. I do sift my soil, the worm castings, so that there's not big chunks. It's just simple and easy. And in that greenhouse that I showed you the pictures of that we just built, the main purpose of that is to feed the people who live on the ranch, so we have fresh food all the time. And so I plant 1 200 cell tray every month of the year. I usually do it like around the 15th of the month or whatever. I actually look at the moon calendar and plant it like 3 days before the full moon, but that makes me a weirdo, so don't worry too much about that. But I think it matters, it works. The rotation of the earth matters, so why wouldn't the moon matter? But I believe that works because I've tested it and they do better if you grow them right before the moon. And I put them in this little tiny greenhouse. So all the seedlings go in here, and I have a heating mat in there on that back table in there, and it will hold 4 or 5 trays at a time, and that's the only heat in the whole thing. The solar greenhouse is working really good with that stone wall to keep it from getting too cold in the winter. And I just water it with a cheap watering can like you'd get at a Walmart or something. So see how ugly this looks? I mean, this is nasty looking, right? But this lettuce has been harvested 4 times, and this day is when I planted the next crop in, which are broccoli. Can you see the broccoli in there? On the right side, you can see my drill, just barely, it's blue right there, and then the shaft going down in, drilling the soil. And then if you look careful, you can start picking out those broccolis that are in there. So I'm going to the next slide, so watch. And that's what it looks like when I cut out the broccoli. So I just take a sharp knife, cut out the lettuce. So I just take a sharp knife and I cut them out, and then there they are, and they've already been established for 2 to 3 weeks. And then this was in the winter, so, if you're used to growing broccoli in the summer, you're like, man, they're sure little at 3 weeks, but in the winter, nothing grows, but their roots were getting established really well there. We do the same thing with plants that we have in pots. We have that diversity of different kinds of crops growing in there. So these are fig trees that are dormant because it's winter, but I have lettuce and garlic and stuff growing in those pots. And I'm angry in this picture because I didn't have a place to put all my transplants, because I'm going to have 2,000 transplants, and they're big ones. They're all going to be in the paper pots this year. And I got thinking, man, there's wasted space on top of that stone wall right there. And so I snapped my fingers, and then the next morning there was a nice, beautiful table in there. So that's so we work miracles around here. It's pretty fun. Look at the diversity of this place. Does that look like a well-kept vegetable garden? It doesn't look too bad now. In 3 weeks from now, half of those tall things were starting to dry out. It can be ugly. It can be a very different aesthetic to have multiple species going to seed and to flower. We took, I wrote it down, but it's like 1,500 pounds of food out of this greenhouse, and we didn't have anything heavy. It was green type stuff. So it produced really well. We didn't have potatoes, and there weren't tons of carrots, and so the weight was mostly, it was an abundance of all kinds of good greens. This is a good friend of mine. His name's Joseph Lofthouse, and he's a really good plant breeder. So there's 4 things that we teach the students that come to our ranch about plant breeding, because we all have this concept in our mind. We need master's degrees and PhDs and teams of all these geneticists to breed plants. But you got to know 4 things. Number 1 is plants make seeds. Number 2 is offspring will resemble their parents and grandparents. Number 3, sometimes a trait skips a generation. Usually it doesn't. And number 4, select the seeds that tasted good. People have been breeding plants this way for thousands of years. Some people say 10,000 years is when agriculture was invented, right? We call this landrace breeding, so we have a lot of genetics, so we will get tons of genetics, meaning a whole bunch of varieties, and then we grow them all, and they all cross-pollinate, which sounds like a nightmare. And it could be if you have lots of books that you're keeping, but we don't keep books. We only save seeds the next year from the ones that tasted good. And what happens is it actually breeds really good vegetables for what we want and in our climate. We have an 80-day growing season. That's why we went to such an elaborate thing to build that big old greenhouse, is because we simply can't really grow vegetables there. It's too cold. The nights can often be 40 degrees in summer months. But this is celery, and we're looking for traits that are growing through the winter to be cold tolerant. This strawberry, I picked this strawberry in January, just a month ago. You can call me a liar right now because I don't even believe it myself. I'll agree with you. This strawberry bloomed during freezing weather. It grew during freezing weather. It would freeze at night, and it would unthaw during the day. Okay? And it ripened, and it turned red. And this was in the morning. You can see the snow right above my head. Look at the snow right there on the on the greenhouse. It was cold. That strawberry, has anybody ever gotten a frozen strawberry out of the freezer and you like bit into it? That's how this was. But there was one big difference. This one tasted super good. So we are breeding for this type of thing. I didn't know strawberries had the genetic capacity to do this. That melon in my hand, that cantaloupe, it ripened in our 80-day growing season. It's the size of a baseball. Who would buy a cantaloupe the size of a baseball? Nobody wants those. But if you tasted that, everybody wants them. The flavor was amazing. Butternut squash, is that the shape they're supposed to be? The seed cavity was about the size of like a tennis ball would not fit in that seed cavity. Okay? But look at all the meat on that thing. So we are breeding for some vegetables that can do some very good feeding of us, and and it's not all seed. Here we're looking at the different varieties of lettuce that will grow in the hot weather. And the one that my hand's on that's green, it didn't grow at all. It's going to seed right now. But that red romaine, it was doing really good. So we're always testing all these varieties to see what we can do. That greenhouse, I never picked a weed out of it. But we produced all these squashes out of it. What I did is I went in there and I put a foot of hay, just old rotten hay that the cattle had been eating from a big round bale. And it had rained on it and dried out 5 or 6 times. So all the weed seeds in that hay had already sprouted. So I took that in there and I put it in there, and no weed grew. I mean, I picked 7 weeds. And here it is later in the year, and I'm looking at a cantaloupe to see if it's ripe. Student housing. How would you like to be 18 years old again and come live in a sheep camp for a summer, having me jump up and down all day screaming at you? It'd be great. So we have a good group of youth who are hopefully coming this year. This is another classroom shot here of air layering trees. So we have this fig tree, this super wonderful, beautiful fruit, and we want to asexually propagate that so we can get the very same fruit. So we're just growing roots on the plants, but we're teaching all these kids how to do this stuff so it actually works. And the kids love the garden, you know. Look at all those brassicas and that happy child. Here's more kids. Classroom shot later in the year. And here's your teachers. Me and Jared Sorensen and our wives, we live there on the ranch, helping these people to know how to have healthy farms, healthy soils, healthy families. I'll take questions. We have 30 seconds. Say it again, sorry. So what variety of butternut squash? That has been bred for about 5 generations, coming from like an array of 20 or 30 different squashes in that genus, right? And well, species really. But we just mixed up all the seed, we planted them out there, and then we just selected the ones that would ripen in a very short growing season, and ones that tasted good, and ones that had the elongated necks. So that's an ongoing breeding project. So I can't tell you a variety name. It's just a landrace variety that we've. Me and Joseph Lofthouse, yes. Yeah. Next question, yeah.
So you had mentioned that you don't worry about some plants taking nutrients from the other plants. And so when you're planting in your new transplants, about 2 to 3 weeks before you take and harvest the old ones, do you have any distance that you worry about, or just kind of wherever it fits in?
Okay, yeah, so the question was on planting. Am I worried about distances and spacing so that the plants are not like competing for nutrients, right? That's what you're asking? No, man. We just plant the thing. It's a jungle. If something doesn't do good, I'm all about genetics, okay? If something doesn't do good, then we don't save seed from it. It's harsh. Don't come live on my farm. But that's how we select. If we have a big, beautiful crop and we coddle it and we take care of it, and any little problem, man, we're out there doing all this stuff, we're going to have weak plants. We need, especially with what's happening with climate, you know, and all this stuff, we need to be having plants that are resilient and tough and that they will produce food for people, you know, in bad conditions. So, yeah. That wasn't a good answer, but that's the real answer. Okay, next question. Yeah.
With
Yeah.
If that wasn't the case, would you ever do a cover crop in the garden?
Okay, so the only reason I will do a cover crop in a garden is if it needs it. I already have a living root in the soil all the time, so I only grow edible things unless I have a serious ecological disaster. And those bulldozers and backhoes were a serious ecological disaster. That's why I had the daikons in there. I mean, daikons are a good vegetable, they're good to eat, but not that many. Because we're just feeding our family. It's not like the Cisco truck is coming and picking up semi-loads of daikons, right? So, did that answer your question? Okay, cool. One more question. You've got a crazy man here and you won't ask him a question. That's great. Hey, thank you. Appreciate you guys.
All right, thanks everybody for showing up, and thank you, Mr. DeMille. So with that, we're done in here. You can make your way to your next presentation. I think you got about a 15-minute break, so thanks for everyone showing up.
Nicely done.